welcome to the video, y'all. I know it's been quite a while, and there's multiple reasons for that, but this is going to be, I guess, what was intended to be a full review of the Carve 2, and it still kind of is, but it's not going to be entirely like our standard format, only because we didn't entirely get to finish the review, kind of similar to the Viper XC video, but it is what it is. Some of you might have seen a small clip of this video, but might not have known it. Anyway, let's just get on to it. This is the Gin Carve 2. For anyone that's potentially looking to buy a Gin Carve 2, you would obviously know that it's not a beginner glider by any stretch of the imagination. It's a advanced freestyle acro slalom based wing that is for advanced pilots. You're looking at it in the only standard color it comes in, which is lime. This particular one is an 18 meter, and I'm right at the top of the weight rating for this wing. So obviously, anyone looking at this wing knows that it's going to be good at one thing in particular, and that's playing, having fun, rolling, barrel rolls, wing overs, dynamic maneuvers. That's where this wing shines, plain and simple. It's pretty efficient for what it is, and it's pretty fast for what it is. As you'll see later, I'm not entirely sure that I'd recommend that you play a lot with the Speedbar, especially down low. If you're gonna play with the Speedbar, you have to be aware that there's a chance that you can take a collapse, and you definitely want to have some altitude to recover from said collapse should that happen. And yeah, we'll get into that more, but anyway, like I said, we're not going to do like a full normal breakdown review of this wing like I normally would and show you all the speeds individually and all that. I'll flash up on the screen what the speeds are of the wing. I mean, it's not slow, but I don't think it's going to break any world speed records. But right here and now, what you're seeing on the screen, this is what this wing does well. But let's get to the meat and potatoes of the video. And this was my only hang up with the wing. Like I said, this is going to be related to the Speedbar. Unless you are extraordinarily experienced with Speedbar, ready and willing to accept the consequences of using the Speedbar, and are familiar with recovering from collapses, I just wouldn't recommend using Speedbar on this wing. But let me give you a little background. So my original speed test I was doing on the wing, I started at 1,000 feet, but for the Speedbar test, I decided to climb to 2,000 feet simply to have a little extra buffer in case something went wrong. Now, I'm not entirely sure that I needed the extra buffer, but I'm glad I had it because, as you'll see, things didn't quite go according to plan. So on this particular day, it was really smooth, honestly. There was a smooth, at altitude, 10 mile an hour wind. So all my speed tests, typically I'm doing 20 miles an hour in one direction and 40 in the other. So, there's a 10 mile an hour wind, but it's laminar, smooth. Any of you that flown up 2,000-3,000 feet right before sunset, even if there's a bit of wind, it's smooth. It's not even relatively close to conditions where I would be concerned with doing anything flight wise, speed bar, wing overs, barrel rolls, whatever. It wasn't even a question in my mind. I also had in my mind a notion that I wanted to ensure that there was a 0% chance that I was going to accidentally pull brake while I was doing the Speedbar test. So I decided to stow my brakes during the Speedbar test. Now, I guess depending on your perspective, I've heard people say that they recommend doing that, and that was kind of my mentality. Obviously, this is the choice that I made at this time. Speaking with people afterward, some people don't recommend you do it, and I can say that a few things going forward. So in this particular case, fully trimmed out on this wing, you are perfectly allowed to use the brakes. As soon as you start applying Speedbar, you are no longer allowed to use brakes. However, fully trimmed out, you are allowed to use brakes. But my mentality, I wasn't 100% sure if I was allowed to use brakes fully trimmed out. And so my thought process is, if I'm not allowed to use brakes on Speedbar and I'm not allowed to use brakes fully trimmed out, then what's the point in having the brakes in my hands if I'm fully trimmed out and on Speedbar? Because in order to be able to use the brakes, I would need to trim in, and then I could access the brakes. So I think for that reason, if I do end up using Speedbar more in the future, which I really haven't since this video, which was filmed in February, but if I do decide to use Speedbar again, I'm kind of gonna, I think I'm just gonna set my trims to a point where I'm allowed to use my brakes. So if that's 50%, if that's fully out, whatever the case is, you know, I'm not going to exceed that point with my trims when I'm potentially going to use Speedbar, just so that I know as soon as I dump the Speedbar, I'm fully allowed to do whatever I wanted. So I'll just let you watch this, and then I'll come back and give you my thoughts on it. Fuck. Just took a collapse on the Speedbar. I did not even have the brakes in my hand, and my motor died. I got enough altitude to recover. Man, it's not even that rough either. That was fucking sketchy. Why? So, like I said, my mentality on this was that I wasn't allowed, or wasn't sure if I was allowed to use brakes fully trimmed out, and I know I'm not allowed to use them on Speedbar, so I stowed my brakes. And so my first thought process as soon as I took the collapse was, let me yank in as much trim as I can just to make sure that I'm 100% kosher on using the brakes, and then I'll fix what I need to fix. Now, as you can see, the collapse was, it's not super violent, but it was violent enough to where the brake toggles came off of the magnets. And I fumbled for them a little bit, but it wasn't like a big deal, especially considering how much altitude I had. And like, obviously, you know, it didn't take much to get the wing back under control. And this isn't like a super crazy, dangerous, had to throw a reserve kind of collapse on Speedbar, but it just kind of puts into perspective that, like, even if you're applying the Speedbar evenly, which I was, even if it's in smooth conditions, which it was, even if you're not accidentally or purposely applying brake when you're not supposed to, which I wasn't, things can still go wrong on Speedbar. Like, it's just, you know, there's a risk there. Now, certain wings, there's far less risk. I feel like certain wings, like this wing, there's more risk. And I spoke to people about this wing and was told, and I'll paraphrase, but basically that they are aware that it's trimmed fast enough to a point where there's certainly a chance that the wing could take a collapse on Speedbar, and they expect that the pilots that are flying this wing are advanced enough and experienced enough to quickly be able to fix the collapse, or, you know, recover from the collapse and just move on with their flight. No big deal. Happens all the time, kind of thing. I was told that the slalom and competition pilots that fly the wing take collapses like this all the time, and it's a normal thing. It doesn't bother them. They just, you know, it's just a blip in their flight. They're like, whoop, and they fix it and go on with their day. And, you know, for those guys, that's fine and dandy. But, you know, for a lot of pilots out there that, you know, might not use Speedbar all that much, or might not be super familiar with taking collapses all the time, or, you know, are not flying on the ragged edge and, you know exactly what's going to happen and how to react, you know, it could take you off guard. So I just want you to be aware that this wing is not necessarily one that I would learn to fly Speedbar on. It's an advanced wing for advanced pilots, and Speedbar is one of the more advanced portions of this advanced wing, so just take that into account. But it kind of, I mean, you'll be able to hear the audio, but it kind of put me in a place where it kind of soured me towards Speedbar a bit. And maybe someday I'll, come back around to it. But I mean, watching some videos like Mitch G ripping down low on the warp and, doing all the sweet stuff on a Speedbar, and like, I have friends that have warps. I had a warp, and I've flown in relatively rough conditions on full Speedbar on the warp and never had a problem. But then in this situation, it's super smooth and it's not a bad day at all, and I didn't do anything wrong, and the wing takes a collapse. So like, it's just kind of a spectrum of like, you never really know how close you are to the edge until you tip over it. And I mean, certain wings can have the propensity to take collapses on Speedbar, and I guess this is one of them. So I don't even necessarily know that I would ever use the Speedbar on the Carve too much. I have a Carve one. I still fly it. I still love it. And I don't use the Speedbar on it. I've used it once just to see, how fast it was, how it worked. It also has the power attack system, so I wanted to try that out. But I don't use Speedbar on the Carve because it's not... I mean, I'm not a slalom pilot. I'm not trying to shave seconds off of a course. And I know that there's a lot of people that use Speedbar to, control altitude and pitch, and that's cool. But obviously, like, they know what they're doing, and hopefully they know the risk associated with using the Speedbar. But it's just not a thing that I really do. I don't really use Speedbar that much, and the only time I really use it is like, if one of my friends has gotten away and I want to catch up to him, and we're both on fast wings, so I'll just kick the Speedbar for 30 seconds or a minute to catch back up. That's basically where the Speedbar lives in my life. That's obviously aside from the fact that I do use the Speedbar in all of my reviews. I like to use the Speedbar in my reviews so that you guys get an entire picture of the speed portfolio of a wing and what it's capable of. So, take that for what it's worth. But that's one other scenario that I use the Speedbar, is just feeling out a new wing and seeing what it's capable of. But I just don't know that it has much of a place in my life after this and the Viper XC and the Anthony Vella incident, which you can say wasn't 100% directly related to the Speedbar, but he didn't take a collapse until he pushed the Speedbar. So it's just an added risk there. Obviously, like, what was it, years ago with the Cougar 3 and Tucker, and there's a lot of Speedbar incidents that I just feel like it's maybe not entirely for me. I mean, I don't know that I need the extra 5 or 10 miles an hour. Is it worth that? For me, I'm just not sure. But anyway, I digress. Let's move on to what I think of the Carve 2. So I think personally that the Carve 2 is the best wing at what I love the Carve for, which is acro barrel rolls and, just hooning around. I don't think that there's any wing out there better at that than the Carve and the Carve 2. I mean, the brake pressures are super light. It takes very little pressure to do any kind of maneuver. The roll rate is incredible. The efficiency and the way that it builds energy, but then it also kind of dissipates it on its own kind of quickly and easily, so that you're not burning as much altitude or having to manage quite as much energy long term. So for example, like on my Carve 1, I would say on average I probably lose about 150, maybe 200 feet depending on the barrel roll every time I do a barrel roll. And this wing I seem to lose like half that. It's like 100 feet per barrel roll. So you can pack in a lot more in a given amount of altitude. The other thing is, like, with the Gin Falcon 2 that I fly, if you point it at the ground, it doesn't pull out of that very quickly, so you burn a lot of altitude and it builds a crap ton of energy. But I feel like the Carve just kind of like, I mean, it does build more than enough energy to do anything you want, but it doesn't like just suck to the ground and lose altitude, and like it pulls out of maneuvers quickly. It maintains energy, but it never builds so much that you have to like take a really long time to burn it all off. So I really like that about it. So one of the next things is the launch characteristics of the Gin Carve and the Carve 2. Honestly, like, they're some of the better, if not best, launching wings that I've flown. Like, they're incredibly easy to launch. They come up quickly. They don't tend to overshoot super fast. They don't have a real big tendency to fall back on you. They just kind of shoot up relatively quickly and then wait for you to get off the ground. The Carve 2 does have a little more of a tendency to kind of like, the way I describe it is you kind of hit a wall when you hit the wing. Some wings you hit the wing and you almost don't even feel the weight of the wing. It just starts coming up quickly. That's kind of the way the Carve 1 is. The Carve 2, you have a little bit more of that wall hitting sensation where, like, when you hit the end of the lines, it kind of dead stops you for a second. So it can have a little more of a tendency to overshoot, but if you just trim it out a tiny bit, like an eighth of the way or a quarter of the way, then that tendency tends to go away. I don't have that problem with the Carve 1, but that's something that I noticed with the Carve 2. But honestly, launch characteristics of the Gin wings is fantastic. It's on par with Ozone wings in launch characteristics, but you have a lot lighter brake pressures. You have heavier duty fabric. It's not light fabric by any stretch of the imagination, but somehow they've still managed to find a way to get it to launch like it has light fabric, which I don't know what they're doing, but it's fantastic. I love it, and they need to keep that up for sure. And the landing characteristics are a lot of the same as the launch characteristics. It has very good, smooth, predictable flare authority, and honestly, like, it's a very easy wing to land smoothly and without having to run your butt off. But I'll leave you with that. If you've got the chops and the interest, I highly recommend trying the Carve 2. Honestly, any of the Gin wings, but this is a fantastic wing. Just be careful of that speed bar. But thanks for joining me on another one. Y'all have a good one.